So this was original, a 3-video series, as you saw in the introduction, a week or so ago. But now it's going to be a 4-video series. And, well, you're going to see why here shortly. This 4th video came out. Now, Angel, you published a video last week addressing an over 2-hour video by the Adventist Defense League, whose topic of that video was the non-canonical status of Ellen White. In this over 2-hour video of theirs, proving Ellen White is a non-canonical prophet, they cite Amos 3:7, Proverbs 29:18, and a bunch of other scriptures to support their topic of Ellen White as a non-canonical prophet. Now, the title of your video is what again?
Refuting Kevin L. Morgan's attempts to legitimize Ellen G. White as a non-canonical prophet.
So, I can imagine that Kevin L. Morgan attempted to refute your video showing that Ellen White is really not a non-canonical prophet. And I'm just going to imagine that he attempted to do that refutation in the comments of your video.
No, instead, he sent word through a third party to tell me, quote, your video is a waste of time.
So, but Morgan did actually eventually respond in the comments to your video. And, well, what did he say?
Well, rather than address the 5 major factors that I pointed out in my video, I outlined them, refuting their claim that Ellen G. White was a non-canonical prophet. He chose to take the attention off of the main point. The main point in both of our videos is that the status of Ellen G. White as a non-canonical prophet. So rather than addressing the 5 major factors that I outlined here, he chose to take the attention off the major point onto a lesser point. This is a red herring tactic that is designed to make a less important issue rather than the main issue to be under discussion. And so from this red herring tactic, it soon became a case of the tail wagging the dog, which is essentially allowing a less important factor to control the discussion.
Let me just say what you said in a different way. Here is an elephant in your kitchen, walking around in your kitchen. The elephant, non-canonical prophet, topic, Ellen White. Here's this elephant walking around your kitchen, breaking tiles on your floor, and here's Kevin Morgan getting on his hands and knees going, hey, Angel, you got a broken tile. All the while, he's ignoring the elephant in the room, the main topic of the discussion. The elephant in the room is the non-canonical status of Ellen White. It's not the fact that you have broken tiles because you got an elephant walking around. Kevin Morgan simply does not address the main topic of your video or his video,
which are essentially the same. The status of Ellen G. White as a non-canonical prophet. And so what happens is I notice that he's denying their original position. And so the original position, the lesser issue is that God always has prophets amongst his people to guide them under the circumstances of their time. And I did say this repeatedly in the video, but that wasn't my main point. The main point of my video is addressing the status of Ellen G. White as a so-called non-canonical prophet. And so he enters into your channel, Jim, and he goes on the comment board, and the first question that he asked me is, why didn't you contact me so we could sit down and I could tell you what I believe? Well, I don't have to have him tell me what he believed because they took over 2 hours on their video advocating the position that Ellen G. White was a non-canonical prophet. And he even went so far as to challenge me on this issue that he had advocated such a view.
So now we have a 4th video because Kevin Morgan has modified his view and introduced a new topic.
Now, he challenges me on this to prove it. Well, now, Mr. Morgan, this is why I have waited until now to answer your question. You spent over 2 hours advocating the position that Ellen G. White was a non-canonical prophet. Well, rather than acknowledging, say, hey, you raised some good points in your video, and we're going to recant this, and now this is our new position. If you had the integrity to do that, I would have said to Jim, take the video down. They changed their position, and now they have a new position, okay? And so you rightly identify this as prophetic blackouts, which clashes violently with the official Seventh-Day Adventist teaching that God always has prophets amongst his people.
Isn't that something? Kevin Morgan responds to your video. Doesn't respond to your video, really. Your video is about Ellen White and her status as a non-canonical prophet. He responds with a completely new topic. Doesn't address the topic of the video of yours, which yours was addressing the video of his, and the topic was Ellen White is a non-canonical prophet. So here we are again with this fourth video. So let me just say this rhetorically. The Seventh-Day Adventism teach prophetic blackouts? By the way, what is the definition of a prophetic principle that we heard Jason Thomas use, which Kevin Morgan is sitting there nodding his head when Jason Thomas is saying, he's going, yeah, more information. He's nodding his head as he is quoting Amos 3:7 and using this prophetic principle. So we're going to show in Adventist literature in this video that there's no such thing as prophetic blackouts. We're going to show that the Adventist Amos 3:7 prophetic principle is of an Adventist God who warns all peoples in all ages of all significant historical events, whether they be negative or positive. And by the way, this prophetic principle that you're going to see here in this Adventist literature predicts a future prophet. So we're now going to examine a series of Adventist quotes spanning many, many decades. We're going to let Adventist literature speak for itself. We're going to let Adventist literature refute Kevin Morgan and his now new argument of prophetic blackout, which doesn't exist in Adventist literature.
And in doing so, Mr. Morgan, I have provided you and the rest of our viewing audience the timeline where you clearly advocated this position that God, quote, always has prophets amongst his people to guide them in the circumstances of their time. But now, in modifying your view, you have a modified view that clashes violently with official Adventism's teaching that God always has prophets amongst his people to guide them in the circumstances of their time.
Let's look at that literature now.
Well, let's do it. Now, before we look at Adventist literature, we want to revisit the topic that Morgan and his cohorts put on the table in this video here, entitled Ask an SDA. So now, in response to this, we follow with my video, which is entitled Refuting Kevin L. Morgan's Attempt to Legitimize Ellen G. White as a Non-Canonical Prophet. And Morgan countered with his red herring fallacy in his initial post by citing prophetic blackouts, thereby recanting his original position. In other words, God always has prophets amongst his people. So now let's look at an enlarged copy of his statement here, which reads, quote, somewhere you got the idea that I have asserted that God's people will always have a prophet. Maybe you have a reference where that is what you understood me to mean, but I have said just the opposite, end quote. So it is clear that Morgan denies what he and his accomplices spent 2.5 hours advocating, that God always has prophets amongst his people. This is how he took the attention off of the topic of our videos. This is how he sidestepped the 5 major factors I outlined in my video. And I'll play a brief video clip so you can hear it for yourself momentarily. And this includes you, Mr. Morgan. You wanted the proof? Here it is. But be sure to stay tuned to the portion where we expose you when we pit you and your revised view against the official SDA position through their literature. And now, folks, here are the 5 major factors. 1 through 5, you have the different living arrangements between the Old and New Covenant ideologies, number 1 here. So there are several major disadvantages of living under the Old Covenant ideology, which I mentioned. Therefore, there was a need for prophets. I also outlined this, that the ancient Israelites did not have a copy of the Bible in their possession, including that they were illiterate. I also mentioned that there was no closed Old Testament canon, and the New Testament period was a transitional period, and there was still a need for prophets. And lastly, I outlined that there was no closed canon until 397 AD. Hence, no longer a need for prophets. Morgan sidestepped all of this by taking the attention off the topic of both of our videos, which was the status of Ellen G. White as a non-canonical prophet. What he did here was that he used a red herring fallacy, which is a tactic that is used in order to distract from a relevant or more important issue. In the novel A Study in Scarlet, Detective Sherlock Holmes examines a clue, which is later discovered to be intentionally misleading. This leads to Morgan's second fallacy, which is a case of the tail wagging the dog. Notice, what he did here is the subject of both of our videos is the status of Ellen G. White as a non-canonical prophet. And so he sidestepped my refutation of their video by addressing a related but off-topic issue. So this is the tail wagging the dog, allowing a less important or related issue to control our discussion. Now, here is the proof Mr. Morgan asked me for. The proof where he was advocating the view that God always has prophets amongst his people to guide them under the circumstances of the time that they are living. This is the video, and you'll find him advocating this argument beginning at 34.13 in the timeline in my video. Watch Morgan nod his head approvingly and listen to his responses.
You know, there's a verse that comes to mind that I think that about this. There's this principle about prophets. Amos chapter 3, verse 7. It says, "Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets." So what I'm seeing about prophets and what I see about Agabus is that God is definitely revealing to them what's coming to God's people. So
Okay.
I think that's what I necessarily see, so in this.
Okay, so it's information.
Yeah.
There you have it. Now, but thanks to Jim, I am now aware that the term prophetic principle is code for God always has prophets amongst his people.
So here in the video, you saw Jason citing this prophetic principle. And we also have Kevin Morgan affirming this prophetic principle, and he does so twice. Now you are about to see this prophetic principle advocated throughout Seventh-Day Adventist literature as we take a walk through memory lane.
But let me point this out first, Jim. If Morgan did not believe this so-called prophetic principle, that God always has prophets amongst his people, this was the place to say it and correct Jason. Instead, he affirmed it 2 times. In fact, he even opened up a can of worms, compounding matters even further, as you will see as we go through these citations from official Adventist literature.
You know, you're absolutely right. That was the place for him to correct Jason or to clarify his position, but he didn't. Nonetheless, we are now going to look at official SDA teaching, and you know what you're going to see? There's no such thing as prophetic blackouts. So let's look here first. All ages, keep this in mind, as you're going to see, have or can expect prophetic warnings, and there is no prophetic blackout possible. We're going to start here with Ministry Magazine, 2004. We're going to look at this red box here blown up on the next slide. And what do we see here? Well, first at the very top, you can see we got Amos 3:7 highlighted. And look what it says at the bottom. God has provided special prophetic assistance throughout history. Look at that again, throughout history. How do you get a prophetic blackout in the phrase throughout history? The answer, you don't. Let's look at another magazine.
Before we do, this is precisely what Morgan and his cohorts argued in their video for 2.5 hours.
That's right. Let's go to this other Review and Herald magazine we have. We got one here from 1953. And what does it say? In all ages, Christ has been revealing his secrets to the in all ages. How do you get a prophetic blackout if Christ is revealing secrets in all ages?
Right.
Again, you don't. Let's continue. This is just more of the same in magazines. Signs of the Times, Review and Herald. Look at the Signs of the Times, 1941. This is what? Divine assurance. And divine assurance of what? Not just events that occur in the Bible, but upheavals, changes, crises occurring throughout mankind. Look at the 1955 Review and Herald. Of course, we quote Amos 3:7 again. I like this quote. Look at this. We quote Amos 3:7 more than other Christians. I want to say, of course you do, because you don't quote it properly, as Angel already showed in his first video. And then you're going to see a consistent theme here. Look at the purple text at the bottom. Permanent principle. This is just the start of a trend you're going to see.
So according to the organization, they cite Amos 3:7, quote, more often than other Christians. But Morgan would have us think otherwise all of a sudden, recanting his original position.
All right, so let's move on to the next, where we have, again, more of the same. Look at the 1980 Advent Review in the upper left-hand corner. We have what? God's uniform dealing with mankind. How do you get a prophetic blackout with God's uniform dealing with mankind?
Again, this is what Morgan and his companions argued for 2.5 hours. God always has prophets amongst his people.
And this last one here, before we move on to a new topic, the Signs of the Times from 1952. Bible reveals plainly that in all past ages, God has always told men when a great event was near at hand. Past ages. I don't see any exclusions here for any past ages. Again, there is no prophetic blackout, period. God either has prophets at all times or he doesn't. And you know what these magazines say? He does.
There's not even an implicit statement that there are blackouts.
That's correct. Let's move on to the next area. Now that we proved there's no such thing as prophetic blackouts, we're going to show this. God is going to reveal not only judgments and crises, etc., throughout history, but beneficial actions that may happen to his people. We're going to start here with this Signs of the Time magazine from 1883, and you see this small section. We're going to blow it up here on the next page, and look at what this one says. It says in the middle, he has never done any great work for or among his people. Well, those are beneficial actions. Look at the next block of purple text. Never brought sore judgments upon the earth without sending a warning. So here we have two things happening. And you can see Amos 3:7 quoted in the middle of the page. Both the good and the bad are spoken of here. I just want to know, who was the prophet, if this is true, who was the prophet telling us when Wycliffe in the 1380s was about to do something very good, and that was translate the Bible into English? Where's that prophet, Seventh-Day Adventism? Let's talk about the bad, the purple text at the bottom there. Judgments. Where was the utter judgment? The judgment of the Muslim conquest, starting with Abu Bakr, who was the second caliph of Islam, in 632 AD. And I'm going to say at least until the naval defeat in 1571. Islam ravaged Christianity. Who were the string of prophets from 632 onward warning of the impending Muslim invasion? Cue the crickets. Let's go to the next one. More of the same. Just look at this magazine in the lower left-hand corner. Very short, succinct, to the point. Signs of the Times, 1943. What's it say? Any great thing. God will bring any great thing upon the earth, and its people are going to know about it. Well, let me ask this now. Who was the prophet warning? All right, Seventh-Day Adventists, hold your seat.
Oh boy.
Who was the prophet warning about the Pope changing the Sabbath? Don't you think that was a great event? That's the only event you guys ever talk about. Show me who the prophet was warning Christians of that event. How about this one? The fall of Constantinople. I think that's a great event. That happened in 1453. Who was the prophet giving warning for that great historical event? Again, we have more of the same. Notice in 1951, Ministry Magazine, right-hand side of the page. There it is. It's a principle again. And what I said earlier, we keep seeing that repeated. Now look at this one in the left-hand corner. This is going to be an interesting one. You can see it's dated 1939. And what's it say? God does not bring things to pass that affect the welfare of mankind without first giving a warning. Welfare of mankind. That's a very broad statement. So I want to ask this of Seventh-day Adventism. Who was the prophet warning about World War I, World War II, Hiroshima, etc., etc., etc.?
Even in written form or orally?
Yes. But let me say this. Notice the date of that ministry magazine. It's 1939. Do you know your world history? Do you know what happened in 1932? Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Hitler is in control of the Nazi government. By 1939, the German war machine is already ravaging Europe. Don't you think that had to do with the welfare of mankind, as you're reading above in the quote? It certainly does. At the very time of this ministry magazine, there should have been a prophet warning what they said in the purple text above. But yet, we don't find one in history, do we? More of the same. Look at 1912.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Notice in all of these citations, you either see the prophetic principle or Amos 3:7, and sometimes both, repeatedly.
You know, as you do here, 1912. What? It's a fundamental principle. The fundamental principle is what? God's dealing with men. We find a fundamental principle and we see Amos 3:7 quoted, just like you just said, Angel. Look at this one from 1873 in the left-hand corner. Promising what? That God never leaves his people in the dark concerning any important event, which materially affects them before the event occurs. Okay, let me ask this now. Where was the prophet warning about the Catholic Inquisition in the 1540s? How about this? Adventism teaches in their literature of the apostate Protestant faith falling away from the faith. Where was the first century prophet warning about that? Don't find it again. Let's do this last one here. Yeah, this one here I liked. God always reveals his present truth. Not a word not a concept I see often spoken about Adventism today. Spoken of frequently of Adventism of yesteryear, but present truth is simply the Adventist teaching of God is revealing truth, which it actually means truth that's not found in the Bible, but truth only relevant for a certain period of time. And they use Amos 3:7 to substantiate that. It's just goes without any further explanation. Now let's bring up this topic. Speaking of the prophetic principle, how about a future prophet? Do you Seventh-day Adventists expect a future prophet? What does your literature teach? Well, let's look at this one here. They got Signs of the Times in 1893. And we're going to blow up these two sections. I'm going to put them together as one on the next page. We have this. So, part at the top, there's your Amos 3:7. And there's your assurance that God's going to let people know. Now look at the second clip. Starts off with, now the second coming of our Lord Christ, Jesus Christ, is an event, right, before which all others great, as some of them, and pale and incident. So we got a future event coming. And then look where the red arrow is. He will warn the world of that great day of his wrath, greater event, coming in the history of the Son of Man. That's an expectation laid out here in Adventist literature that there will be a future prophet. In other words, a prophet who comes after Ellen White. Let's look at the next one here. Actually, look at this one from 1968 on the right-hand side, Signs of the Times. Look at the purple text at the bottom. Again, both of these are speaking of future events and end times. But this, and what they say in the purple text on the right-hand side, we should expect a similar warning, but on a global scale. Everyone's going to be warned of the second coming of Christ. So in other words, we got a future prophet coming after Ellen White. And they even say it more in more magazines. Look at this one here from 1940 in the lower right-hand corner. There's the word principle again. Wasn't this like the third or fourth time I've said this?
Absolutely.
This is all future prophets and end times. That it's going to be expected, you Adventists should expect a prophet to come after Ellen White. All right, now this one here I like. I think this is interesting. So God's going to reveal his judgments and secrets, as we've seen dozens of times as Adventists misquote Amos 3:7. But I'm going to say this. Yeah, you're not going to see all the secrets of God Except you're not going to see the secret judgment time when you as an Adventist are going to be judged in your investigative judgment. So let's start here. We're going to go August of 1923, Signs of the Times, and let's blow that piece up. So here we have the Adventist warning, starting at the very top. So an event of such solemn import to the whole race as the opening of the judgment hour in heaven. Why? That's just code words for 1844 investigative judgment, which you see in the middle text, the judgment of all the earth. Then look at the text on the bottom. He revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets, Amos 3:7. The Lord did not let the year 1844 pass without letting his people know that this last grand assize was beginning its sessions. Look what they did here, though. They said, God's going to reveal his secrets. That's the investigative judgment starting. But as I said, you as an Adventist, that's all well and good. You want to know if you passed your investigative judgment. Isn't that the secret you want to know? Yeah, it is. Let's look at the next slide. They said something kind of like this in April of 1916. Here, Adventism is going to walk you, Adventists, right up to the edge of the cliff and stop. Look at this. You think you're going to know about your investigative judgment. And that's what, start reading the text with me, because it leads you to believe you will. The life record of every member of the human race must pass in review before the heavenly tribunal. That's the investigative judgment. But when? Yes, every Adventist wants to know this, but when? Will the time be announced? Suddenly, without due warning from the seat of authority? And now they're leading you up. And this assurance, what assurance? I guess the assurance that I'm going to be told this, right? And then they quote Amos 3:7. But they never tell us. You read the rest of the text. They never tell us. They never tell you when your time is coming up in the investigative judgment. So your God, and Amos 3:7, he doesn't reveal all the secrets. He keeps that secret close to his vest. You don't get that one. All right, let's move on to the last one here. Now, this one here is the most bizarre use of Amos 3:7 I think I have ever seen. We're going to quote it here in this magazine, this Adventist Today magazine, which I recognize is not an official magazine, but you're going to see here on the right-hand side, we got an Adventist pastor. I have an Adventist in good standing here who's going to make some really heretical statements about Amos 3:7 and God in general. Let's read his statements. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to read it all. Start at the very top. The God we see is usually the God we need to see. If I'm a logical person, I need a logical God. If I'm a sensitive person, I relate best to a sensitive God. God shares portraits of himself as we need to see him. God also shares portraits of herself as we need to see her. For God to be God, he or she must be understandable. Amos 3:7. God is a her? By the way, let me just say this here. When I read this, I thought, this is the most bizarre, crazy Amos 3:7 quote ever. I said, what became of this pastor? So I did a search on him. This is 1986. I'm thinking, did this guy retire? Is he perhaps still being a pastor? Here's what I found out. He was fired in 1997. But you know why he was fired? First of all, it had nothing to do with this article. So this article was allowed to fly from 1986 until he was relieved in 1997. Actually, why he was relieved in 1997, you can go search his name and do it yourself, like I did. What he did was, he started his own ministries in his church, and he was withholding some tithe to fund those ministries. And you current Adventists know, don't mess with the tithe. You mess with the tithe, you're going to find you're going to be shown the door. And he was shown the door for messing with the tithe. Not this quote by calling God a her.
So now we're going to review and summarize the official Adventist prophetic principle and how it flies in the face of Morgan's modified view. Up above, you read a historic timeline from Genesis to the present, beginning with Noah to the time of Ezra. Note the embryonic prophetic principle. Then we have the period between the testaments. No mention of prophetic activity. This brings us up to John the Baptist and the prophetic activity up until 397 AD when the lights went out. But notice again the prophetic embryo from John to 397 AD. And that is until the coming of Ellen G. White in 1844. Now, White has had no prophetic successor to our day, which is 2025. So what we have here is a panoramic view of God's dealings with mankind from Genesis to the present, to say nothing about the future.
So, Kevin Morgan advocates for prophetic blackouts. That's what he is saying. Now, I understand it's my term, prophetic blackouts. But go back and read his comment again, because he's saying God does not always have prophets in every time. Well, that's prophetic blackouts. But you just read in Adventist literature which proves they teach no prophetic blackouts. That's a concept foreign to Adventist literature and doctrine.
And so now let's review some of the events that occurred during this period from Genesis through the present. And so what we're going to find here is that during this period, Jim merely cited a small sample size of significant historical events, beginning with the Great Apostasy, the Muslim conquest,
the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Catholic Inquisition in the 1540s, World War I, World War II, Hiroshima, and we could probably cite a dozen, 24 more wars of that time period. And of course, 9/11. But what we have, the greatest event in Adventist history is the Pope changing the Sabbath. Who was the prophet telling us before, warning of the Pope changing the Sabbath? So, who are you going to believe? Kevin Morgan or the Adventist organization?
Neither.
The Adventist organization has made a promise of prophets preceding all these historical events that you saw, and there's no evidence of prophets warning of any of these events at all. So how do you trust an organization who makes promises about prophetic events and there isn't any? How can you obtain eternal life? How can you trust what they say about your obtaining eternal life? So what this video has shown is that Kevin Morgan is making a really rather new and novel argument in Adventism, arguing for prophetic blackouts. Adventist literature does not teach prophetic blackouts. Adventist literature does teach, actually Adventist literature obligates God to make promises to warn his people of all these historical events you see here in front of you. Yet we know there are no prophets identified warning of these and 24 or so more historical events. Neither Kevin Morgan nor the Seventh-Day Adventist Church can be trusted for accuracy or truth.
And so, on behalf of Jim, this is Angel Ariano Jr., and we both hope that this video has been of great assistance to you. And so, until the next time, this is Angel Ariano Jr. on behalf of Jim, always reminding you to be sure to do all things according to the Scriptures.